Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the IISS. My name is Stephen Simon. I'm the Executive Director of IISS-US and of the IISS Middle East. We have an hour this morning with Admiral Jonathan Greenert, our 30th Chief of Naval Operations, whom I'm very pleased to be introducing here this morning. He is a native of Butler, Pennsylvania. He served at every level of command, to include command of the USS Honolulu, 7th Fleet, U.S. Fleet Forces Command, and of course now as CNO. Following his command of the USS Honolulu, he was given a very serious honor, the Admiral Stockdale Award for Visionary Leadership. Our Navy couldn't be in better hands, I'm sure in our collective view, than to be commanded by Admiral Greenert. We have an hour. The Admiral can speak as long as he wishes. Thank you. And we'll follow that with Q&A.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Good morning. If I say, boy, look at the nice color he has. You know, even at the age of 60, as a service chief, we still have to take a physical readiness test. And I took, put this, oh good, another microphone. And I took mine this morning, and boy, I feel good. So I just thought I'd tell you, if I faint or something happens, you know, what happened to him? So there's something about sitting at a table for 3.5 hours one day, you know, the Senate Armed Service Committee, and then the next day come and sit at a table. So I hope you don't mind. I'll stand for a little bit, and then I'll go back and sit down and take questions. But I wanted to, I'm very pleased to be here. It's a pleasure, and thank you, Stephen, for the invitation. I want to talk about something pretty simple, presence. And our mandate, and everything that we do is I prepare the budget as we work our way through this maze, through these complications in here. Staff says, so what are we doing? I said, well, there's two very important issues. We provide the sea-based strategic deterrent. We have got to sustain that, make sure we have that. That's priority one for us programmatically. And two, we provide presence. And that presence has to be ready. And it will be ready at a certain amount, and it will be out there at a certain amount, and it will be able to respond to contingency at a certain amount. But the underlying principle is, what's the presence that is out there? The national security strategy, to us, when you boil it all off, it says, you are responsible for presence, for me. Our defense strategic guidance, which was put out in 2012, says pretty much the same thing. It's at various levels, with various platforms, with various things to host it and assist it, but it really comes down to that. So we've got to operate forward where it matters. We've got to be ready when it matters to do the calling of our nation. So can I have some graphics here? So we'll start with the simplest part. Maritime awareness is an imperative for us. And when we get together with our chiefs around the world, some of the other guys and gals, they say, you know, there's a sea blindness in my country. They don't even understand there's a sea out there, and it's frustrating. So I tell you, well, we don't have that. We have to have a maritime awareness. So the basic, physical science, 8th grade, 70% of the world is covered with water. But 80% of the population of the world lives near the coast. So it's important, this ocean of ours. Next, please. Trade is the lifeblood of our world. It's all over. We are interconnected. In fact, we're hyper-connected. You know, Mr. Friedman, who said the world is flat, he also says, well, it's hyper-connected. And I think you all understand. But a reminder is, very few countries, very few corporations have all the stuff that they need to assemble and put together products. Their products in their guts, the internals, come from all over the world. And most of it comes in this regard, 90% by volume and 70% of it by value. And we need reliable ocean transportation for the economy to flourish. Pretty standard. Next, please. So when you take all those red lines, and by the way, I've asked my staff, how much do you have to travel and how much to qualify to be a red line on the big red line chart? And that's an interesting perspective, because hold that thought. When we look at another area of the world. But I call these kind of 6 things. If you're a science major, you say, well, look, a bow tie. If you're an engineer, you say, oh, good, a valve. That's a valve symbol. And so whatever you want, that's what and it flows through. Okay? And there's, to me, 6 very important ones. Left to right, Gibraltar, 14% of the world's traffic goes through there, about $2 trillion a year. The Suez, about 10% of the oil. 17,000 vessels a year, pretty important place. Bab el-Mandeb down there by the end of the Red Sea there, 9% of the world traffic, $1.5 trillion. The Strait of Hormuz, 20% of global oil, 85% of Asian oil goes through there. The Strait of Malacca, 18% of global oil, and 3/4 of what Japan, Korea, and Taiwan need, and the Panama Canal, which is being widened as we speak. They're still working on that. They're working on their time to get that done. And the jury is out on how much that will change, throughput through there, but it will increase to some degree. And all those areas are important. And that's where I call them the crossroads. You call them whatever you want. And I say, okay, guys and gals, this is where the world trade is. So where do we have to look as we think about where we're going to deploy and employ our forces? Next, please. So what you got here is the dots are sovereign territory, U.S. Those are our naval bases. There's a few more, but those are the big ones. That's where our ships are imported and will typically deploy from on a rotational basis in most cases, east, west coast of the continental United States. But what I spend a lot of time on are these places here, these little squares here. And if I go left to right, you look at Gibraltar up there, excuse me, yeah, the Rota, Spain. We are working with the Spanish, and this year we will send forward 2 destroyers. These are Aegis destroyers, ballistic missile defense capable with the most modern, if you will, program, the best update, 2 this year, 2 next year to Rota, Spain. That will cover us for missile defense in the Mediterranean. Now today we have 10 destroyers on the East Coast earmarked to rotate and fulfill our requirements in the Mediterranean. So in the future, 2. So you see the leverage, right? If you are forward. So by Italy we have, that represents Naples, Ceuta Bay, and Sigonella, which are areas where we have airfields, we have places, again, to rest, relax, repair, get logistics and what we need there. If you move your way down to down here, and my pointer is going to get eaten up by the light, but down here in Djibouti. Now, I'll tell you, my staff said, Djibouti, give me a break. What do we care about that? Dusty, hot, and I said, you see the airfields there? And it's got a deep water port. And you go in there and refuel our amphibious ships, and our ships that do counter-piracy and counter-terrorism all in and around here need Djibouti. All right? I spent years, way long ago, as a junior officer, submariner, looking through a periscope at the Soviets who had the wherewithal to go out here to Socotra Island, and they had that as a submarine base many years ago. You're nodding, Paul, so you're showing your age. Everybody else knows what he's talking about. So, submariner here. So I said to myself, boy, one day, if I'm ever in charge, I don't want to be down here looking through this. I'd rather be up there relaxing in the sun like the Soviet sailors were on that given day. So Djibouti is very important to us. Bahrain up there, we've been in Bahrain for 50 years, and they've been with us the entire time, through thick and thin as things go on. The Cold War, the Gulf Wars, you name it, the tanker wars, it goes on. So we have got to continue to work that. Our 5th Fleet is there, our Navy Central Command is there, and we are evolving our ship structure to put ships in Bahrain. We have about, let's see, we have 8 patrol craft in there. We have 4 mine countermeasure ships and some more. We have a float forward staging base, and I'll talk about that a little bit. It's an important place as we work it out. Okay, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia, at British territory, we are renegotiating to renew our lease there. But we have a fleet tender there that international ships use that. So we use that quite a bit. Singapore, another opportunity recently where government said, why don't you bring some ships down here and operate out of here. So we will forward station 4 little combat ships. I have a picture of that, so most of you know that. I recognize a lot of faces here. But that's a big deal because that kind of ship resonates with Southeast Asia. That's the kind of ship that those areas say we could use that down here as we conduct operations. So we'll eventually operate up to 4 out of there. We started on that with the Freedom. Now, Northern Australia, the government said a few years ago, you can deploy Marines from Darwin. And we'll do this in an increasing manner. There are about 250 deployed there. They just finished the deployment. It's getting to be the rainy season there. So about 6 months a year when it's not pouring down rain, we'll exercise with Marines down there. Our job there will be to provide that lift, that naval, that maritime lift, and we're working to do that And I'll show you a way. There's a couple of clever ways to do that other than just big amphibious gray hulls. We will have an amphibious ready group by the end of this decade to deploy down there as we migrate our deployments and change them. And then you go up into Northeast Asia, you're familiar with Japan. That remains the same. We're going to increase our presence in Japan. I want to do that by the end of the decade. And we're working with the Japanese here. And it would involve Aegis destroyers. So that, oh, I almost forgot. Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. When we provided support to the Haitian government, big earthquake a while back, some people said, well, that was when Maritime Sea Lift came and they brought through Transcom big ships. Well, before we got the port open, we were rotating high-speed vessels. We were flying material into Guantanamo Bay and rotating things with high-speed vessels out of Guantanamo Bay. So that will be important for counter-drug as we work down in that area. So these places, these bases are important. So that's where we kind of lay down the support. Next, please. And this is where we are today. Now this is an average. So I see we have 99 ships out of 285 in our Navy. For your information, through the years, let's go to 20 years ago, we had about 450 ships. We had about 105 forward. 10 years ago, we had about 298 ships, almost 300 ships. We had about 100 ships forward. So today, 285, we still have 100 ships forward. Deployed, I should say. And it is, I've kind of given it away, it's about moving forward where we can and when we can, because it's that leverage of forward stationing versus rotating. If you rotate, it'll take 4 ships in the continental U.S. to keep one forward. One's there, one's coming back or just got back, one's getting ready to go or is on its way over, and one's in deep maintenance. And that works for almost all of our classes of ships. It's a similar rotation for aircraft, but not exactly the same. The Asia Pacific remains our primary. You can see that. You can see how many non-rotational we have there. And if I were to show you that through the years, that would increase. And if I took you out into the future, it would increase in our plan, regardless of sequestration and the future budget. To me, it's presence to continue to build on that and put forward what we can. All right, next one, the new area of the world, the Arctic, the evolving domain. Now, I lay these in here because, well, just so it can sort of be compatible with the previous chartlets that I showed you, which were, sea lines of communication. But I tell you, we're in the middle of studying this, and here's what I've got my guys doing. Number one, tell me when this thing is really going to be ice-free. Not occasionally, but seriously ice-free, and where you can have traffic. Number two, where can you really have traffic? And you say, well, where we've drawn these lines, you can travel that way, but what's the draft, for example? Well, the draft is, in other words, the depth of the water. It's not all that good through the Northwest Passage of Canada for the big stuff if you want to be effective. It's really not that much. It's pretty good here in the northern route, but Russia says, hey, that's my area, and I'd like a tariff, and we'll escort you. And we said, I don't think so. And we're in negotiations with that. So when is it ice-free? Where are there some, perhaps, disagreements? Is there a threat up there? And so I got my naval intelligence people sitting down and I say, I want you to look ahead. I want you to look now. Where is there a threat? And if there are good routes, not a lot of threat, and it's sort of like, I don't know, the South Atlantic, and I'd say, so what's the big deal? How often do we need to go up and make sure that those sea lines of communication, that lifeline is secure to keep the economies of the world going? And by the way, well, we're working with industry, our Maersk people and others to say, what are your plans? You're going to use this thing when it's ice-free? And we're getting mixed response right now, frankly. So when we're done with that, we'll determine what kind of presence, what kind of rotation do we need in the Arctic, put that in the mix, and we'll establish sort of the way you see now. Right now we got one SSN up there, so we got a little work to do, perhaps. But just so you know, there's roughly, at any given time, an SSN running around up there in the undersea domain. So we'll work through that. That kind of gets the presence piece to be able to support operations up there. The second part would be if something goes wrong up there, search and rescue. Coast Guard has the kind of the dot on that, but we're a supporting entity for them. So I work with the Commandant Bob Papp and our staffs to say, okay, what kind of support do you think you'd need? And then we have to be able, we can't just kind of put on our Arctic hoodies and say, okay, here we go. It's tough up there. You got to understand the communications. You got to understand the weather, obviously. You know, how good is C4I, how well does equipment run, etc. And we learned this the hard way when we moved to the Gulf, where it was hot, dusty, salty, and all that. Those were some tough times. So that's the presence. That's the laydown. That's how we build it. That's why it is where it is. And everything that we do, our fleet response plan, the capability that we bring to the given area of the world, sort of centers around, well, where do you need to be and why do you need to be there? So I'll leave you with what our presence provides. Well, I've been kind of beating the drum here that it protects the U.S. and the global economy, and that much you know. It's being where it matters, when it matters. And just a couple of quick anecdotes. Last spring, Kim Jong-un said, I think I'll launch a missile. Everybody said, oh man, this may not be good. We need missile defense and we need it now. So in 72 hours, because we were in and around Japan, not far from Guam, we were able to establish a missile defense hierarchy, if you will, architecture, because we could. Because we were out there in and around the forward deployed naval force of Japan and Guam. Recently in Syria, the president said, I'd like some options. And we said, okay, Mr. President. And they said, how you doing? I said, well, we're ready. We have 3 ships in the Med. They got 40 Tomahawk missiles if you choose to use cruise missiles, and we can provide options in that. Well, I'd like a little more. I said, okay, we'll move the Nimitz into the Red Sea. And now where you got an air wing, and you got 4 more cruisers, destroyers, 40 missiles each there. There's more options for you. So it's being forward where it matters, when it matters, so you can provide those options when they need, in the right places of the world. We've got to be able to some people call it anti-access area denial. I just like to call it joint assured access, because anti-access, if you say, look, we've got to defeat anti-access, I'd say, you know, I'm not going to knock down every fly that's out there. That's a bankrupt strategy, and there's not enough money in the world to do that. But you've got to be able, we have got to be able to get in where we need to get in, for as long as we need to get in there, to do what we need to do, and then get out. And that's in the cyber domain, the space domain, the air domain, the surface domain, and the undersea domain. And we work a lot to do that. And we look at what we put forward, where we put it, so that we can be where we need to be in whatever domain that is around the world for assured joint access. And lastly, we've got to evolve. We've got to be innovative. I talked to you a little bit about 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and today, how many ships we have and where they are forward. And it isn't just about ships, but that's the currency we tend to measure your Navy, and we can talk about others if you want. It's about other things. So as we go out there into the future, destroyers are key, carriers are the key. You know, they're our most adaptable platform. They carry that air wing, they project power, they keep on the move. And we're bringing more destroyers in. We're bringing better destroyers in. We've just launched the Zumwalt class. We're going to christen and launch Gerald Ford, the next type of carrier, here this weekend, and then of course SSNs. But there's a few other vessels I want to show you that are kind of critical to the future. Next one, please. Little combat ship. Many of you are familiar with it, but they say, hey, check it out. And you've got that camouflage. But what's nice about this is, next one please, it's the inside. Usually in the back of a surface ship you see a bunch of turbines and all that, and there's a lot of volume. And it's volume, speed, adaptability, modularity, and the ability to change and to do different missions. So we've got 12 of these being built or under contract. Next please. And it's got a sister 12 of these. Next, please. Which is wider. That's 100 feet wide. That's a lot of flight deck. And it has a lot of internals. You can see the Connex boxes, the helo alone on the flight deck, and then a lot of business up here forward that also can be used. So this is, there's a lot of options here. And the Commandant of the Marine Corps and I are looking at this, and we're working with our staffs to say, you know, where do we go with here? Bill McCraven, Commander SOCOM. These are wired up. They've got the command and control means, and they've got the power means for those kind of ops. Next, please. So we said, all right, look, in the world of the future, we need to be reactive to do anything from humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, to go after high-value targets, bad guys, gaggles of bad people. What do we use to put things ashore on? And we said, well, big deck amphibies. And we go, okay. Well, they're built for joint forcible entry, and they're kind of put together in an amphibious ready group arrangement. But we disaggregate them and we send them around the world, but they're pretty pricey. A new San Antonio costs about $1.5 billion. A new big deck amphib costs about $2.5 billion. But one of these, mobile landing platforms, and we have this one, it's the Montford Point, will cost about $500 million. And it's a tanker. And you take the internals, you take the tanks out, and you put ballast process in there. So you can ballast up and down and drive air cushion on board and put connexes in trucks. So you say, all right, nice cartoon, Greenert. What's it look like? Well, it looks like that. And by the way, the second one, the John Glenn, is 95% complete. It's in the water. So this was the Montford getting ready to go out on sea trials a couple years ago. She's up in Everett, Washington now. We're shaking her down, getting ready for deployment. And you say, well, what does it look like flooded down? Looks like that. And that's probably not a good term. Ballast it down. And you can ballast, port and starboard, if you will, so you can drive stuff on. So you say, all right, 2 of those. What about operating helos, rotary wing, drones, and all that? What do you do about that? You say, well, ask them, when you build one of these and a float forward staging base, make that very strong, so we could use it as a lily pad for F-35B. And the big helos, you get my point here, and all the different drones. And we went to the SOCOM people and said, what do you need to be sure that we have the backbone for your stuff, munitions, armor, lockers, if you will. And we did. So this one is under construction. That would be the 3rd of 4 of those kind of ships. And the 4th one is in our 14 budget. We're struggling to make sure that due to sequestration, we keep that on track. So, by the way, this one's about $600 million. So it's about $100 million for the flight deck and Arthur Sudan. Next, please. So we have 11 of these. These are high-speed, 40-knot JHSVs, and they were used for quite some time, built by a company that builds ferries. So they kind of know what they're doing, moving people and stuff. And you see that ramp there, that'll hold a tank. Go ahead, next one. The internals look like that. So there's a lot of stuff in there, different shapes. Next. People on board, about 300. Backpack, gun, and ferry them somewhere very quickly if you need to. We checked it out. Back in that door in the back here, there's a medical facility in here that can be amped up to a higher level of medical. You can feed people in here. It's not for overnight, unless you really want to. That's coach class, trust me. Maybe economy plus. Okay, yes. So and it goes fast and it rocks around. So it's made for quick reaction shuttling. Next, please. So those are the kinds of ships that we're talking about, and they will go to different places. They will go to like your Southcom, your AFRICOM. Those mobile landing platform, a float forward staging base. Imagine one of those loitering for long periods of time off of Somalia, Yemen, move up into the Red Sea, go on over into the Med, come back up into CENTCOM as we go around the world. We're still working through the details of the CONOPS. You say, all right, which COCOM gets it? And I said, I don't think it belongs in a COCOM. That's where I am now. It's the kind of ship you swing to go where you need to go to do that. Today, not long ago, we had the San Antonio doing what I just described. Sorry about that. Sort of a pricey ship to be going around doing that. Not nearly the flight deck that we're talking about on the float forward staging base. All right, evolving weapon systems. Just a couple of here. We're going to deploy her next summer to the Arabian Gulf. And you say, okay, does that thing work? It does. I didn't bring the video, but trust me, it's out there on YouTube somewhere. With that laser shooting down a drone, target, and then that laser, kind of disabling a high-speed vessel, a little, speedboat on the water. So we're going to take it out there and check it out and see how it works in the Arabian Gulf. Maybe some people will see it and say, oh my gosh, look what they got. Next, and many of you may have heard of the Railgun. And the last time I actually, if you get into Dahlgren, Virginia, last time I looked at the Railgun, the power, the capacitors to build up to get the electromagnetic energy were as big as twice the size of this room. I said, when are we going to be ready to put this thing, shipboard? Hey, we're going to demo this thing. So one of those joint high-speed vessels, we asked our shipbuilders to look at the stability needed on this, to put a railgun on it, put the power system underneath, and take it out and check it out and see when this will be ready to go aboard maybe a Zumwalt class destroyer, DDG 1000 class out there into the future. We'll see. But a couple years away, and check it out. That's cheap compared to what we spend on even a 5-inch 54 shell today. By the way, a laser shot costs about 85 cents for one on target, hold it for 15, 20, 30 seconds, whatever it takes, and then a recharge. Costs you another puck. So imagine this thing shoots metal slugs. You don't have magazines. You don't have all that kind of stuff that goes with it. So a piece of our future. So our priority is presence. We got to preserve it. We got to evolve. We've got to keep the Asia Pacific as our number one, if you will, focus of effort there. We will be ready forward to the levels that we kind of negotiate through as we go through this piece of this budget piece. But underlying it all, I'll leave you with our sailors. They are the difference. This is the 40th anniversary of the all-volunteer force. And without that all-volunteer force and generations of kids that are ready to come forward and lead and take it on, we're not the Navy we are today. So thanks for listening. I look forward to your questions.
Well, let's get started with Q&A. Before you speak, when I call on you, please identify yourselves for our collective benefit. Okay. Side of the room, blue blazer. Yeah.
Hi, Bill Courtney with Computer Sciences Corporation. What are the prospects for funding the next generation ballistic missile submarine? Is it possible that that can be funded outside the normal shipbuilding budget? Will Congress be sympathetic to it? It is a national asset, I think, as some people have argued.
Yes, well, I hope so, because, and we're having this debate internal to the Department of Defense. It will clobber the shipbuilding plan when we start building heel to toe, and that's what we'll have to do. What's called the Ohio Replacement Program. We're working on a name, SSBNX, if you will, and so we're working at it. In our last two 30-year shipbuilding plans, we've identified that and pointed to it and said, hey, look, we have to come to grips with this. Secretary Gates, before he left, he made a point in the department that we have to come to grips with this, and he did not believe the Navy would be able to endure it. And Secretary Carter has acknowledged that it is unlikely the shipbuilding plan can endure that. How it gets done is TBD. We've taken on challenges like this before when we brought the Ohio in and we started building nuclear aircraft carriers in the past. So there are different ways. I don't know the right path, but I would tell you this: if we have to endure it in the current, budget that we have and the shipbuilding plan we have, subject to dramatic changes in other programs, it will really clobber it, and it will hurt the industrial base, for cruisers, destroyers, and other kinds of ships.
Thanks. Third row.
Good morning, Shin Shoji from NHK. Admiral, when you were in AEI earlier this summer, you said you're planning to have LCS rotation in Japan. Can you give us some details, like timelines and where you want to have them deployed eventually?
Sure. In Sasebo, Japan, right now, we have minesweepers. And so one of the values, the littoral combat ship is really designed to replace our currently frigates, our minesweeps, and our patrol craft. And all of the capabilities that they bring. That's the key. And so at the end of this decade, somewhere around 2018-19, and I'll tell you what, my public affairs officer's in the back, he'll give you the precise date, but if you said end of the decade, you're pretty accurate. We intend to change out in Sasebo with the little combat ship. I don't know yet what version, whether, the if you will, Independence class, the wider one, the trimaran or the monohull. I don't think we've sorted that out yet.
Thanks. Back of the room, right next to you, James.
Stanley Roth, the Boeing Company. I'd like to go back to the beginning of your presentation where you went over the presence and asked you about the Middle East. There's a growing argument that as the U.S. approaches energy independence, we should perhaps consider less responsibilities in the Arabian/Persian Gulf. and let others do it. I'd like to get the U.S. Navy perspective. One, do you think the United States can afford to do that, given our allies' dependence on the region? And second, how do you respond to the argument that China's been a freeloader and maybe the Chinese Navy should take this over?
Well, I'll start with the last one first. I had a dialogue, I had a week with my counterpart, Admiral Wu Shengli, this last summer. And it was a good week. Some said, oh, it was nice and warm. It wasn't warm. It was respectful and I think useful. And that was one of the things we talked about briefly was the ability and the willingness of them to go out and about because they're capable. They're starting to become very capable. And at what point, and how do we interact first in a kind of in an exercise manner and then maybe get to coordinated operations? So I don't think we can leave because we're the hyperconnection. If somebody else has energy problems, we're in trouble because we get products from them. But we do encourage and are now becoming more encouraging, if you will, for those to come to the Arabian Gulf and operate. We've done so in a couple of manners. International mine exercises. So we said, hey, look, if somebody closes or mines these straits, we need to get them open fast. And your participation would be useful. And it doesn't, you don't have to steam a ship over here. You can use unmanned underwater vehicles, and we've demonstrated that. So that would be one piece. Second is so encouraging allies over there. Next, what is the first step? Maybe in China, they're coming to RIMPAC 2014. And that gives us an opportunity to start doing coordinated operations. And you got to start somewhere. So we'll get that going and take deliberate, I think, process from there to see where that might go. But that might be a potential future. Who knows? They're in the Gulf of Aden. I think you know the Chinese Navy, and have been for years. And so they are very used to rotating and deployment to that area.
Fourth row back.
Thank you, Admiral. This is Anus Goodman from Wolf Den. I was just curious your take on the effects of U.S. credibility from the government shutdown, from budget sequestration and other uncertainty, and whether this is having an effect on our allies and treaty partners.
Yeah, the international credibility, if you will. Yeah, I worry about that a little bit, because what happened to me is I had an International Sea Power Symposium. We hold it every other year, and we had 110 nations coming, either the head of the Navy or a representative or head of the Coast Guard. And Wu Shengli was coming, first time ever. And remember, he'd just been here in the summer, so he was coming back to the U.S. And I had to cancel it because of the shutdown every month. So I'm trying to reschedule that, as soon as feasible there and put something back together. So there are people who are very understanding. Our allies say, look, I understand, it's an issue. But there are those that don't really follow the internals of our government, and they're saying, I don't understand. So I think we really have to go to work on that. And when we talk about the rebalance to Asia, there are 4 parts. To me, there are. One is force structure, and we kind of kicked that around. I showed you. 2 is capability. What migrate to good capability out there. 3 is, the home port shift toward the west, and people talk about that 60-40. But 4th is very important, and I call it intellectual capacity. And that is paying attention to the allies and sitting down and say, so what's our future? What are we going to do with the relationship, both old and new? And that's the one, through your topic there, that I think we need to work on in that region as well as the whole world.
Thank you. Standing in the back of the room.
Thank you, Admiral. My name is Dong Huiyu with China Review News Agency of Hong Kong. The United States is concerned about China's increasing A2AD capability. And China recently demonstrated the first time its nuclear submarine force. What kinds of weapons that the PLA Navy is developing concern you most? And in the speech, you mentioned that the United States Navy will increase its presence in Japan at the end of this decade. Could you please elaborate a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
There is no specific weapon that I would point to say this concerns me greatly, if you will. And China certainly has the ability and the right to their growing economy. It would sort of make sense that they would grow their military to match their interests out there. But my question would be, and Admiral Wu Shengli and I talked about, what is the strategy? What is your intent here? Because it's a good idea for two great navies to sit down and understand the strategy for each and the intent, so that we can respectfully kind of cohabitate an important area of the world. And we talked about how just the behavior of our mariners is important. Two ships passing in the South China Sea, you name it. How do we talk to each other so there's no miscalculation? And show the due regard and the due respect for two, like I said, great navies. So we have a lot of work to do to understand. So where are you going? What is, how is that important? Is that contrary to where we're going and our philosophies and our policies? I think that's more important to me than individual weapon systems. The presence in Japan, when I say grow, it would be, some say modest, but I'm talking about the forward deployed naval force. We provide in the Northeast, for the North Korea piece to Japan, a missile defense capability. So ensuring that that capability remains appropriately robust and in the form of DDGs, ballistic missile defense destroyers.
John Alderman, do you have your hand up?
John Alderman, CSS,
Hi,
DC, and CNO. As we think about how things look from the perspective of our Gulf allies, they see us tailing down from a decade of fighting 2 wars out of their region. They are insecure about what we're doing with the Iranians. You talked about part of this is listening to our allies and seeing what they want. How do you approach the problem of our allies feeling abandoned, even if we don't intend to abandon them, even when we talk about the importance of the Gulf to global security and everything else? It seems to me almost inevitable that they're going to feel some discomfort as we arrive to the new normal. Intellectually, how do we approach that conversation?
Well, I believe we need to understand and describe expectations, because, as you said, even if we say we're not going to abandon them, and of course, what are our actions, and how are they interpreting our actions, and what have we told them about our actions that we're about to take so they don't misinterpret them, if that makes sense to you. Now, if they say, well, I see what you're doing, I understand why you're doing it, I don't like it anyway, then, well, okay, they're the interests of each. But what I believe is that this dialogue, especially in the world I live in, is the maritime dialogue. And as the gentleman's question earlier, the guy right next to you, excuse me, I forgot your name, but he said, with all this budget changes and all that, does that affect our credibility? We've got to really work on where we're going and what we're going to do here, and be clear with our allies in that. And that's, we've got to first establish it ourselves. We're working toward what is going to be our strategy, our clear funding intention here, the method by which it's going to be, and then we can lay this all down. In the world I live in, we're the best Navy in the world. I believe we will be in the future. I'm sure of it. So describing that and showing our intentions that I point up there in real clarity, I think will be the key. If we are muddled or confusing in our dialogue, then we will continue to endure this doubt that we have.
Second row.
Yeah.
There's a mic on the right. Okay.
Dave Rosenberg, Institute for Defense Analyses. Sir, today as we speak, the most powerful storm in memory is hitting the Philippines, may well hit Vietnam as well. I think you were 7th Fleet when the tsunami hit. Given the current budget situation and the importance of presence, do we have the ability to in fact surge the way we did almost a decade ago to provide what is part of the maritime strategy, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, as a critical pillar? Can we do that if called upon?
No. And the issue is what do we have for contingency response? Today, we meet our requirement for forward presence. I just talked ad nauseum about that with you all, put you through that, and then I said, but our ability to respond, and that has been the issue with the recent, with sequestration and continuing resolutions, and that is that normally what we would have in our covenant with our combatant commanders are to have a carrier strike group and an amphibious ready group in each of those two important theaters, Arabian Gulf, Western Pacific, and 3 of each able to respond very quickly, 2-3 weeks to get up and move and go places. Now I have 1 of each able to respond, 1 carrier, 1 amphibious ready group. And today, the one that we have ready to respond is the Nimitz. She's responding. She's in the Eastern Med. So, well, what do you got in continental United States? We got the George Bush working up, but not ready yet. Now, if somebody said go, will we go? Of course we'll go. But we'll have to say, here are the capabilities you get, and they're not the capabilities that our covenant says they get. You know, the broad spectrum that naval forces bring that I was sort of braggy about when I talked about our ability to be where it matters, when it matters, and do things. Back in that day of the tsunami, we had the Abraham Lincoln in the Western Pacific augmenting the Kitty Hawk. And she was leaving Hong Kong, and so she was going to go left up to Korea. She turned right and went down there, and the rest is sort of history. And that's an important point, David, and that's a point we keep making to the National Command Authority. You know, say, hey, here's what you get when you have that sort of limitations. Until we can reprogram or sort out in the longer term with the predictability what our response would be, we're reactive by year because of the budgetary anomaly, I guess I'll call it for now.
Thanks, front row. Front row.
Admiral, thank you. Can you comment under the rebalance Pacific? Can you comment about the expectations the U.S. Navy has laid out for partnership capacity and what their role is in this process?
Yes, most of it is. I have a ton of expectations, but they're aspirations when it comes to the sovereignty, if you will, of fellow navies. But I would really like, and it's going at a pretty good pace, that the Japanese Navy's developing their ballistic missile defense, so that their systems match our systems, so that what they see, I see, so that what they would describe up in what they call a common operational picture in their combat information center, we could share. And then, or you can see the difference. And now you've got, one, it's not a 1,000-ship Navy, but you can see the expansiveness of that. Korea, to develop the same would be extraordinary, and that would help reconcile that Northeast Asia issue with ballistic missile defense. And the ships that they have, the Japanese Navy, Maritime Self-Defense Force and the Korean Navy, are very modern, very multi-mission. So that information sharing, that interoperability is what we really need to move on in Northeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, it's just a matter of it's information sharing. And when Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore got together and decided to do that, they solved their piracy problem pretty much in the Strait of Malacca because they all went out, just shared stuff and worked together on that. At that kind of level down in the Southeast Asia, I think we continue to work to develop that.
Thank you. Second.
Sure, Admiral. Byron Callan, Capital Alpha Partners. I appreciate the focus on some of the naval platforms you were bringing, the sea platforms. Can you talk a little bit about the air platforms that you're bringing in and how they contribute to presence? The F-35, 18 mix, P-8s, Tritons, U-class. Thank you.
The F-35, we should have. We're standing by initial operational capability about 2018, and we want to have it on deployment 2019. And it'll deploy the Western Pacific because that's where we're rebalancing. So that brings a whole host of stealth and interoperability and connectivity, and opens up a broad new beat. The P-8, which is the Poseidon, expansively opens up our maritime domain awareness and our ASW capability, and the first detachment will deploy in a month to the Western Pacific. The Triton, which is a Marinized Global Hawk, we call it the Broad Area Maritime Surveillance. We'll deploy to Guam probably first time. And we're shooting for the end of this decade. It's still under testing. But that really, I mean, what you're talking about is a massive increase, fourfold, of ability to know what's going on out there. And it's not the same as a ship, but it is awareness of knowing what's going on there. And what I mean by that is, well, what do you do with all these ships? Well, we know what's going on, and we can react. And sometimes you can do that from the air, but you don't get the presence. So I'm not trying to equate the two, but I think you get the point. So those are really the big ones, and that's the area of electronic warfare, huge, cyber, huge, and ASW, huge in the theater, and those will upgrade that.
All the way in the back of the room, hand up.
Thank you. Rebecca Grant, Ars Independent Research. Thanks for your presentation. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Byron's question. Can you talk a little bit more about the role of unmanned platforms, either in ISR or other missions for the Navy? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Today, we are finding, in fact, this month, I don't know if they're on the lift and gone yet, but they were getting, we had at the, a year ago, 8 mine countermeasure ships in the Arabian Gulf, because we felt we needed to do that to assure ourselves we could rapidly respond to reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And we needed that capability. Now, typically we had 4, so we moved those over. We are now back down to 4 with unmanned underwater vehicles that can find mines and neutralize them and maintain the same capability as 8 of those ships. So these are definitely capability multipliers, and this kind of technology is what will go into the little combat ship mission module. And so we're kind of getting a peek at the leverage that you get right there for unmanned underwater vehicles. We are demonstrating, and it is my goal, I'm really pushing, to deploy autonomous underwater, large diameter, that means kind of 6 feet, unmanned underwater vehicles to go out and do underwater ISR, something that can go out, check out a strait, check out an area of the ocean, come up periodically and report what they have, come up on contact and what they have. We have these things called gliders or flyers that we have been using for years, and they go out and they use energy from just the waves, and sometimes they're battery powered, and we've used them to measure the ocean and understand it, and then you can put sensors on it. So we are using those today, pretty much R&D and demo, but that's a big deal. I mentioned the BAMs, that is an unmanned, the Triton, so that's coming out. Fire Scout, which is the drone that goes on the little combat ship, it was ready to go before the little combat ship, and so we've been operating those now for 3 years and really getting out ahead on that. And we've got a bigger one coming in. You take like a larger helicopter, actually it looks like the one that the weather people were out there on, with passengers up and doing traffic, and it can carry more payload. Instead of 100 pounds, it carries 400 pounds. Instead of 100 miles, it goes 250 miles in range. So we're developing that rotary wing piece, and a lot of that will be support of special forces as well as maritime. Oh, I'm sorry, one more. I would be remiss, forgive me. The unmanned carrier airborne system. We demonstrated that how could I forget this? Huge jump. And in fact, she's going out on the Roosevelt this Sunday, I think it is. Is that right, Danny?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Sunday, and she was out on the George Bush. So that is, we're getting the CONOPS on that done as we move ahead to what's called View Class, which is the larger, not a demo, but a program, where we'll build somewhere around 6 or 7 of them and integrate them into the air wing. So imagine unmanned aerial vehicle with persistence, carrying a pretty decent payload, operating from a carrier, so you don't need a shore site, and you can have the controllability to come and land on a carrier. That's pretty awesome, especially if you see it.
Second row.
Otto Kreischer, Sea Power Magazine. Good morning, Admiral. You and the Commandant are very big on getting Marines back at sea during your expeditionary amphibious type operations, and you've both been working on using the new types of ship to do that. The problem is you're being squeezed on your training budgets, and some of these things you need to experiment and train on. How is that going to set back what you're trying to do as far as getting the Marines at sea more places and doing more things?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, we just need to prioritize auto, and if we continue to live this continuing resolution and sequestration, you get reduced in your training budget just by virtue of an algorithm, and then we go to the Hill, we ask for reprogramming, or they help us. Months go by, then we finally get the money, and then you work through the year. So we want to get by that so we can put together a coherent budget and a predictable one, work together with the Marine Corps. We have a body in our headquarters. It's called the Naval Board. What a concept, excuse me. And so those folks have sat down and planned this out. We just need to get a consistent budget put together and execute it. But Bold Alligator and Don Blitz, which are Don Blitz West Coast, Bold Alligator East Coast, those are amphibious exercises, seaborne, that we had not been doing until recently, and we are committed to making those a fleet exercise, not a command post exercise.
Last time I checked, Bold Alligator 14, we're still in limbo. Do you think you can push ahead with that?
Let me go check. Yeah, I do. I'll do what I can. We need to push ahead and do that too, for the reasons you said, so that we can get out. Now, I don't know if it'll be a big amphibious landing, as opposed to maybe what some folks are calling the new normal. What happens if you have to go in and rescue people, and you know what I mean, that kind of thing. Using those kind of ships with new concepts of operations, you know, the pictures that I showed there. I think we need to move ahead in those kinds of things. But the blocking and tackling of amphibious operations, I acknowledge, has to continue. That's the bread and butter.
Okay, we've got time for 2 more questions if they're snappy. Any takers? 4th row back.
Thank you, Admiral. Henry Newsom, Seacorp Holdings. Henry Newsom, Seacorp Holdings. You spoke a little bit about the effects of sequestration on our ability to respond, and on training issues. Can you talk a little more, whether it's sequestration, continuing resolution, or just the general environment of austerity we're likely to face in the next 5 to 10 years, its effects on the Navy's budget, whether we're talking acquisition, personnel, operations, maintenance, training?
Okay.
That's an easy one.
The worst case is that we go through this period where we submit a budget, it's higher than the Budget Control Act caps, and then we get sequestered. Boom. And then the curtain comes down, an algorithm kicks in, all lines go down 10%, well, 14%, because we'll exempt personnel every year. In the Navy, we will have to do that, because I can't send people out. I can't just say, well, go home, because they got to man ships. So I'd have to take ships out, but that takes a year advanced planning. But I don't have a year advanced planning because I got a different, higher budget that I said, well, everything will be okay. And then I get sequestered. If you go that up, wham, that's worst case scenario. And what that will get you is, because investments accounts get hit, that will get you a scrambling every year with months of kind of dormancy in various programs. If you throw a continuing resolution in there, remember, you're stuck at last year's levels. And a continuing resolution. You need to move the program ahead. It's all been planned, but you can't get started on that program. This year, it's the SSBNX. It's our new strategic summary. Okay, we were supposed to go from $500 million to $1 billion in 13, 14. We're stuck at the 13 levels. We can't get going. We can't hire engineers. And you can't snap your fingers when you get the money eventually and say, all right, everybody, come on in. They got other things going on. So this, I think you get the picture. On this kind of thing, that's the worst case. The best case is that some deal is sorted out and we get out of this. A flexible approach or predictable approach, in any case, is needed. And so we are in the building now, working through. If we were to just assume that we are at the Budget Control Act caps, what does that future look like, and develop that, and then an alternative to that, which would be a higher level. What does that look like? So it's harder because now you're talking 2 budgets. By the way, a tip of the hat to our civilian personnel, the people that we've furloughed, shut down, and haven't given a pay raise to, are the ones doing all this, carrying 2 budgets while we're getting through this all this manifestation. So.
Okay, well, if there is a last question, it has to be one that requires a yes or no answer, because we are out of time, or about out of time. Admiral, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for a really brilliant presentation and your keynote.
You're welcome. Good to see you.